Clean my shoes before you leave." The words hung in the air of the lobby, sharp and sterile as the polished marble under my feet. They were not shouted. They were delivered with the flat, unassailable confidence of a queen ordering a servant. I did not move. My hands, calloused from work she could never comprehend, remained perfectly still at my sides. My gaze did not flicker from her face. I did not blink. I did not defend myself. I did not speak. In that moment, the world narrowed to the space between us, a chasm of power she believed she owned completely. She made 3 critical mistakes that day. The first was underestimating the man she was speaking to. The second was performing her cruelty in a room with a dozen silent witnesses. The third, and most significant, was failing to notice the small figure standing in the shadows of a structural pillar just behind her left shoulder. A 10-year-old girl with my eyes, holding a phone perfectly steady, its small red light a burning silent star in the gloom. To understand what happened in that lobby and what came after, you have to understand the weight of a promise. You have to rewind. Rewind 6 months, to a small workshop behind my house, the air thick with the scent of sawdust and old oil. My father's workshop. He'd been gone for 5 years, but the place still held the echo of his presence. His tools hung on the pegboard, each one cleaned and in its proper place, a testament to a life of precision. He was a master bricklayer, a man who believed the integrity of a 30-story building began with a single, perfectly placed brick. "The first brick has to be perfect, son," he would tell me, his voice a low rumble. "Everything else rests on it." He wasn't just talking about construction, he was talking about character, about life. In my hands, I held his oldest tool, a brass-bound spirit level, its wood worn smooth by his grip. The bubble inside floated in its vial, a perfect captive sphere. It was my inheritance. Not money, not property, just this. A tool for finding the truth, for making things right. My daughter Maya sat on a stool, watching me. Her silence was a comfortable one, a shared language between us since her mother left. We were a unit, a quiet team navigating the world. That day she had a school project, interview someone about their job. She had chosen me. The problem was, I couldn't tell her what I really did. To her and to the world, I was a freelance contractor, a handyman. I fixed things, leaky faucets, faulty wiring, structural assessments on old buildings. It was a good cover, it was honest work, and it paid the bills, but it wasn't the whole truth. The truth was far more complicated. The truth was, the reason I was about to walk into the headquarters of Reed Dynamics, one of the largest and most aggressive investment firms in the country. My work with my hands, the calluses and the simple clothes, was a part of me, but it was also a disguise. My real job was deconstruction. I didn't build walls. I found the cracks in them until they came tumbling down. I was a forensic investigator for a little-known federal oversight commission. My specialty was corporate malfeasance, and Evelyn Reed, the celebrated CEO of Reed Dynamics, was my target. I had been building a case against her for 18 months, brick by painstaking brick. The lobby of the Reed Dynamics Tower was designed to intimidate. It was a cathedral of wealth, all glass and steel and Italian marble that echoed with the sound of expensive shoes. The air was chilled to a precise temperature, carrying the faint chemical scent of ambition. A massive, abstract sculpture of twisted bronze dominated the center of the room, looking like a monument to organized chaos. Behind a desk large enough to land a helicopter on sat a young man in a crisp black suit. His name tag read Kevin. He looked no older than 20, his eyes wide and constantly scanning, a nervous energy humming just beneath his professional veneer. He was the first witness. He saw us enter, me in my simple work pants and a clean but faded polo shirt, and my daughter Maya clutching her backpack, her eyes taking in the sheer scale of the place. I had a delivery to make, a set of custom-built bookshelves for a junior executive on the 14th floor who was a friend of a friend. It was a legitimate side job, the kind of thing that kept my cover intact and my hands busy. It was also my pretext for getting inside the building one more time, to get a feel for the atmosphere, to observe the culture she had built. I had no idea it would be the day the entire foundation of my case would shift. We were waiting for the service elevator when she appeared. Evelyn Reed materialized from a black town car that had glided silently to the curb. She moved, not like a person walking, but like an event unfolding. She was flanked by two assistants who scurried in her wake, their faces tight with concentration. She was immaculate, dressed in a gray suit so sharp it looked like it could cut you. Her heels clicked on the marble with the sound of a metronome setting a relentless pace. As she swept through the lobby, she didn't seem to see the people, only the obstacles in her path. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, scanned everything and registered nothing. It was then that the second mistake happened, not hers, but a clumsy intern's. Rushing to keep up, he fumbled a tray of coffee. A single drop, dark and hot, arced through the air and landed squarely on the toe of Evelyn Reed's pristine, cream-colored shoe. The universe of the lobby contracted to that single, dark spot. The intern froze, his face draining of all color. The assistants stopped dead. Kevin, behind the massive desk, looked like he wanted to phase through the marble and disappear. Evelyn Reed looked down at her shoe, her expression not of anger, but of profound, theatrical disappointment, as if the world itself had personally failed her. Her gaze lifted, sweeping past the terrified intern, past her own staff, and landed on me. Perhaps it was my clothes. Perhaps it was the simple fact that I was standing still, an unmoving object in her path of motion. She saw a handyman, a janitor, a nobody, someone who could absorb her displeasure without consequence. Her eyes narrowed, and she took a deliberate step toward me. The intern began to stammer an apology, a pathetic, desperate sound that she cut off with a flick of her wrist, a gesture of dismissal so complete it was a character assassination in itself. She never even looked at him. Her focus was entirely on me. "You," she said, her voice low and carrying across the silent space. "You look like you know how to clean things." I remained silent. My father's voice echoed in my head. "Let them show you who they are. Then you show them what's right." I gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was not agreement, it was acknowledgement. A predator had identified its prey, and I was allowing the charade to continue. A small, cruel smile touched her lips. She saw my nod as submission. She gestured to the coffee stain with her chin. "There's a shoeshine kit at the security desk. My assistant will get it for you." She paused, letting the humiliation settle, letting everyone in that vast, silent lobby become a part of it. She wanted an audience. She wanted her power to be witnessed. "I have a board meeting in 10 minutes. I expect this to be resolved before I step into that elevator." She then turned her head slightly, her gaze finally falling on the young man at the security desk. "Kevin, is it? Make sure he does a thorough job." It was a test for him, too, a loyalty pledge. Would he side with decency or with power? The boy swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He couldn't meet my eyes. He just gave a tiny, jerky nod. It was in that moment, as one of her assistants scurried to the desk to retrieve the kit, that I felt a small shift in the air behind her. I glanced past her shoulder, toward the massive pillar where I had told Maya to wait. I saw her. Just her silhouette at first, and then, as my eyes adjusted, the unmistakable shape of her phone, held up, the lens pointed directly at the scene unfolding. My heart didn't race. It settled. A calm, cold clarity washed over me. The first brick. This was it. The first brick in the public dismantling of Evelyn Reed. Her assistant returned, holding a small wooden box. He avoided my gaze, his face flushed with a shame that wasn't his. He placed it on the floor between us. Evelyn Reed extended her foot, resting her heel on the edge of the box, presenting the stained shoe to me like an offering to a peasant. The entire lobby was frozen. Phones remained in pockets, but every eye was on us. They were complicit in their silence. They were all witnesses. I looked at her shoe. It was a $5,000 piece of leather, now marred by a single drop of coffee. Then I looked at her face. Her expression was one of absolute certainty. It was the face of someone who had never been told no, who had never faced a consequence she couldn't buy or bully her way out of. She believed she was teaching me a lesson about my place in the world. She had no idea the lesson she was about to teach everyone else. I knelt, not in submission, but with the slow, deliberate precision of a craftsman preparing to work. My knees met the cold marble. I opened the wooden box. Inside were brushes, tins of polish, and soft cloths. I picked up a cloth. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on me. I could feel the silent judgment, the pity, the discomfort. But most of all, I could feel the steady, unwavering presence of my daughter behind that pillar. I was not just a man on his knees in a corporate lobby. I was her father. I was showing her how to face a monster. Not with fists, not with shouting, but with patience, with purpose, and with a memory that could not be erased. I began to clean her shoe. I did it slowly, methodically. I used the damp cloth to lift the coffee stain, my motions small and exact. I was not angry. Anger is a hot, messy emotion. What I felt was cold and sharp, like the edge of a chisel. I was gathering data. The way her jaw was clenched, the smug satisfaction in her eyes, the way her assistants looked anywhere but at me, the way Kevin, the security guard, kept glancing nervously at the main security camera high on the wall, a silent, unblinking eye that was recording this from another angle. She thought she was the director of this little play, but she was just an actress who didn't know the whole building was a set and the final scene had already been written. As I worked, I thought about the files on my desk at home, the labyrinth of shell corporations, the falsified environmental reports, the insider trading that had ruined a small pension fund in Ohio. Each file was a brick in the case against her, but they were technical, impersonal, numbers on a page. This was different. This was visceral. This was character. This, recorded on my daughter's phone, was the story that would give the numbers a human face. It was the context, the motive, the rot at the very center of the organization, personified in a single, arrogant act. She thought she was dirtying my hands, but she was signing her confession. When I finished, the shoe was immaculate. The leather gleamed under the recessed lighting. I placed the cloth back in the box, closed the lid, and rose to my feet. I did it all without a word. I met her gaze. "There," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Was that so hard?" She gave the shoe a final, approving glance. Then she delivered the line that would echo in boardrooms and courtrooms for months to come. She looked me up and down, a final act of dismissal. "Clean my shoes before you leave." It wasn't a request, it was a statement of fact, an assertion of her reality. She turned, her assistants falling into formation behind her, and swept toward the private elevator bank, the click of her heels once again the only sound in the cavernous space. She never looked back. She didn't need to. In her mind, the transaction was complete. The world had been put back in its proper order. The moment the elevator doors slid shut behind her, the spell was broken. The lobby exhaled. People started moving again, talking in hushed tones, their eyes darting toward me. The intern who had spilled the coffee approached me, his face a mess of guilt and gratitude. "I'm so sorry, sir. I don't know what to say." I just looked at him and nodded. "It is not your apology to give," I said, my voice even. I turned and walked toward the pillar. Maya lowered her phone, her expression unreadable. She didn't say anything. She just slipped her small hand into mine. Her grip was firm. We were a team. As we walked toward the exit, I passed the security desk. Kevin was staring at his monitor, but his eyes weren't focused. He looked up as I passed. For a fraction of a second, our eyes met. He saw something in my face, a lack of defeat, a quiet intensity that didn't match the scene he had just witnessed. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it. He simply gave me a short, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of witness. He had seen it, and he would remember. The ride home was silent. The city slid past the car windows, a blur of concrete and glass. Maya sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, her phone clutched in her lap. She hadn't said a word since we left the building. I didn't push her. I knew she was processing, replaying the scene in her mind just as I was. We understood each other without the need for empty words. When we pulled into our driveway, she finally turned to me. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, were serious. "Dad?" she asked, her voice small but clear. "Are you okay?" I turned off the engine and faced her. I reached out and tucked a stray braid behind her ear. "I am more than okay, sweet pea," I told her. "What you did in there, that was very brave." She looked down at the phone in her hands. "I got all of it," she said. "The sound is really clear. You can hear everything she said." I nodded slowly. "I know you did." I didn't have to ask. I had taught her to be observant, to be steady. She was her grandfather's granddaughter, even if she'd never met him. We went inside. I made us sandwiches and we ate at the kitchen table, the silence comfortable again. After she went to her room to work on her homework, I went to my office. I plugged her phone into my computer and transferred the file. I clicked play. The video was perfectly framed. Maya had braced the phone against the pillar, eliminating any shakiness. It captured the whole scene. Evelyn's imperious posture, my stillness, the frozen expressions of the onlookers, and the audio. It was pristine. The acoustics of the marble lobby had turned it into a recording studio. Every clipped, arrogant syllable she uttered was captured with perfect fidelity. "Clean my shoes before you leave." It was damning. I watched it once, then a second time. I wasn't watching it as a man who had been humiliated. I was watching it as an investigator analyzing a key piece of evidence. This video was not an instrument of revenge. Revenge is an emotional act. This was an instrument of justice. Justice is a structural one. I didn't leak the video to the news. I didn't post it on social media. A public shaming would be temporary, a fleeting spectacle for the outrage machine. It would make her a victim in the eyes of some, a martyr to cancel culture. I wanted something permanent. I wanted to use her own system against her. Her power derived from the carefully constructed image of a flawless, untouchable leader. The video was a direct contradiction to that image, but its power would be magnified 1,000 times if it was deployed not in the court of public opinion, but in a place she could not control, a federal investigation. I saved the file to a secure encrypted drive. I labeled it Exhibit 7B. My case against Reed Dynamics was built on a mountain of financial data, Exhibit 1 through Exhibit 6. It detailed racketeering, securities fraud, and illegal offshore tax shelters. It was a solid case, but it lacked a soul. It was a story of numbers. Exhibit 7B, this 3-minute video, was the soul. It was the proof of character. It demonstrated the rot at the core of the company. A culture of arrogance and impunity that started at the very top. A CEO who would publicly humiliate a stranger over a drop of coffee was a CEO who believed rules were for other people. The video was the Rosetta Stone that would translate the cold, hard numbers of her financial crimes into a language the Board of Directors, the SEC, and the Department of Justice would understand perfectly. It was the first brick, and it was perfect. For the next 2 weeks, nothing happened. The world continued to turn. Evelyn Reed continued to grace the covers of business magazines, hailed as a titan of industry, a visionary leader. I continued my work, finishing the bookshelves for the executive, fixing a neighbor's plumbing, living the life of a simple handyman. But behind the scenes, I was meticulously integrating Exhibit 7B into my final report. I wrote a detailed, dispassionate analysis of the incident, cross-referencing the timecode on Maya's video with the official security footage from the Reed Dynamics lobby, which I had already subpoenaed under a sealed warrant. I noted the reactions of the staff, the verbal commands given to the security guard, Kevin, and the CEO's complete disregard for the half-dozen corporate bylaws concerning employee conduct and public decorum posted not 10 feet from where she stood. I wasn't building a case for assault or emotional distress. I was building a case for a pattern of behavior, for a leader utterly unfit to manage a publicly traded corporation. I was proving that the same recklessness and impunity that led her to commit billion-dollar fraud was present in the smallest, most personal interactions of her day. The case was no longer just about money. It was about an abuse of power so profound it permeated every aspect of her existence. On a Tuesday morning, I submitted the final report. all 800 pages of it, along with the 7 exhibits. Then I waited. The gears of justice turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. The first tremor hit 3 weeks later. It wasn't public. It was a quiet, internal earthquake. The board of directors of Reed Dynamics received a sealed copy of my report. Not the whole thing, just the executive summary and a link to a password-protected server containing one file. Exhibit 7B. I wasn't there, but I have read the minutes of that emergency board meeting. They watched the video in silence in their mahogany-paneled boardroom on the 50th floor. They saw their celebrated CEO, their corporate icon, in her moment of unscripted cruelty. They heard her voice, clear as a bell, delivering the line that would become her epitaph. They saw the faces of her employees, frozen in fear and complicity. They understood, in that moment, that their company was not being led by a visionary. It was being led by a liability. The financial crimes in the report were bad, but this was worse. This was an existential threat to the brand. This was indefensible. The first calls were made to their lawyers. The second were to a crisis management firm. Panic, cloaked in professional jargon, had entered the building. The next phase began. Federal agents, my colleagues, entered the Reed Dynamics tower. They weren't aggressive, they were quiet, polite, and armed with subpoenas that had the force of law. They began interviewing everyone who was in the lobby that day. The assistants, the intern, and the young security guard, Kevin. I read the transcript of Kevin's interview. He was nervous, but he was honest. He recounted the events exactly as they had happened. His testimony was a perfect match for the video evidence. He didn't editorialize. He didn't offer opinions. He just stated the facts. He was asked by one of my colleagues why he didn't intervene. He looked down at his hands. "I have a mother who depends on me," he said, his voice quiet. "I need this job. I was afraid." That, right there, was the heart of it. That was the culture Evelyn Reed had built, a culture of fear, a place where decency was a luxury no one could afford. His testimony, the testimony of a young man just trying to get by, was more powerful than 1,000 pages of financial data. It was the human cost of her ambition. The news finally broke a week later. It wasn't a leak. It was a coordinated press release from the Department of Justice. Reed Dynamics CEO Evelyn Reed under federal investigation for securities fraud, racketeering. Her face was plastered across every news channel. The stock plummeted. The empire began to crumble. There was no mention of the video. It was held back, a trump card for the prosecution. The public narrative was about complex financial crimes. But everyone on the inside, everyone who had received that sealed report, knew that the catalyst, the single piece of evidence that had made her indefensible, was a 3-minute recording made by a 10-year-old girl. 6 months after that day in the lobby, I returned to the Reed Dynamics Tower. The building looked the same from the outside, a monument of glass and steel piercing the sky. But inside, the atmosphere had changed. The oppressive, sterile silence was gone. There was a low hum of anxious activity. I was not in my work clothes this time. I wore a dark, conservative suit, the uniform of my actual profession. I was not there to fix anything made of wood or wire. I was there to oversee the final stage of the deconstruction. I walked through the revolving doors and into the marble lobby. It was the same space, but it felt different. The abstract bronze sculpture seemed less like a monument and more like a wreck. At the security desk sat a familiar face. Kevin. He wasn't in the simple guard uniform anymore. He wore a suit that was a little too big in the shoulders, and his name tag now read, Head of Corporate Security. He had been promoted after the old guard, all fiercely loyal to Reed, had been swept out. He saw me enter, and for a moment recognition flickered in his eyes. He remembered the handyman. Then he saw my suit, the leather portfolio in my hand, and the 2 colleagues who entered behind me. Understanding dawned on his face. He stood up. He didn't smile. He just gave me a single, respectful nod. The same nod he had given me 6 months earlier, but this time it was not a nod of witness. It was a nod of acknowledgement, of closure. As we crossed the lobby toward the elevators, they opened. Two men in expensive suits stepped out, flanking a woman. It was Evelyn Reed. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. The sharp, predatory confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle, bewildered anger. She was no longer the queen of this domain. She was a ghost, haunting the scene of her own downfall. She saw me. Our eyes met across the marble floor. She saw the man she had ordered to clean her shoes, now dressed in the armor of the very system she thought she owned. Her mouth opened, a flicker of the old arrogance returning, but no words came out. There was nothing left to say. I did not slow down. I did not gloat. I did not even change my expression. I simply held her gaze as I walked past her, my face a mask of professional calm. My silence was my final statement. I had a meeting with the new court-appointed CEO on the 50th floor. I had work to do. 1 year later, I stood in that same lobby again. The bronze sculpture was gone, replaced by a simple, elegant fountain whose gentle splashing sound filled the space with a sense of calm. The company had been restructured, rebranded. It was smaller, leaner, and for the first time in its history, honest. Evelyn Reed was barred from holding an officer or director position in any publicly traded company for life. Her plea deal for the financial fraud charges kept her out of prison, but it did not keep her out of obscurity. The last I heard, she was managing a small retail boutique in a town no one had ever heard of. A quiet, unremarkable end for a woman who demanded the world's attention. Kevin was still there, now the director of corporate security for the entire firm. We spoke for a moment, a brief professional exchange about the new access protocols. There was an easy respect between us, the unspoken bond of two people who had seen the truth of that place and had, in our own ways, endured. That evening, I was in my father's workshop. The smell of sawdust was the same. The tools hung in their same perfect order. I picked up his old brass-bound level. I held it in my hands, feeling the smooth, worn wood, the satisfying heft of it. It was a simple tool, designed for one purpose, to find what is true. I thought of Evelyn Reed, a woman who had built a crooked empire on a foundation of lies. I thought of myself, a man who built things, and a man who took them apart. They were two sides of the same coin. I held the level up, the small bubble floating perfectly in the center. My father's voice was as clear as if he were standing next to me. The first brick has to be perfect, son. Everything else rests on it. My case against her wasn't built on anger or a desire for revenge. It was built on a single, perfect, undeniable piece of truth, captured through the steady hands of my daughter. All I had done was place that brick, and her entire rotten structure had collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. True power isn't the ability to command others or to make them kneel. That is the illusion of power. True power is the quiet, patient work of building something on a foundation of integrity. It's knowing that you don't have to shout when the truth is on your side. You just have to lay the first brick, make it perfect, and then let the flawed foundations of others crumble on their own. In the workshop, Maya was at the other workbench, carefully sanding a piece of pine for a birdhouse we were building together. The sound of the sandpaper was soft and rhythmic. We were not tearing anything down. We were building something small and good and true. If you have ever been underestimated, if you have ever been made to feel small, remember that. Do not argue. Do not fight on their terms. Just focus on your work. Build your foundation. Lay your first brick with perfect integrity, and trust that everything else will rest upon it. The truth has its own weight. Thanks for listening.